out?
Didn't get a chance to fully look at it. Yeah, I've been out on what site visits today. It's been fun.
I get shows out.
Yeah. Went to Animal Acres quarry today to look at some stuff. The master gardener group there. So hi, Mark. Okay. Yeah, so I'm a minute here. Make sure that I was doing everything right. Since Elizabeth's not here.
We're making nervous.
I don't know. Did have a lot of people check in on me today. Like, are you sure? There you go.
Well, we all know who to play.
But yeah, I'd love to stop by, was what I was gonna say. Think about that tree.
Okay.
And I'm like, I don't really need to, but I think it'd be also I want to look at the fungal issue stuff here.
Yeah, we had a pathology come in. She thought it was just our area. Widespread.
Yeah.
Epidemic. It can kill healthy trees if they're stressed.
Yeah.
This is 7 over 10 years.
That's nice.
It's not all of those years stress.
Yeah. All right.
So I will call the meeting to order. Does anyone have a short reflection they care to give us? Our angels, you know, somebody anyone else?
Unless you want to do like that, get in the car.
I was gonna put that in for the report, but so it's not formally on the agenda, but I'm sure what happens. All right. Adoption of the agenda, are allowed to modify the agenda, special meeting. So
I move adoption. Second.
all in favor? All right, approve the minutes.
Anyone else need a copy?
Move to approve that.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, minutes are approved. There is no one here to give a comment. And that.
Technically, you do it one member of the policy.
Oh, we can write a 30-minute comment later, but we can spend the end.
If you would want to give a public comment about some other,
Oh,
let's do that.
care to make a public comment about something?
Big CRs.
All right, reports and announcements. What we have, one thing I know we have to report is picnic in the park last Saturday. Or
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thank you to Marty Bed for taking that for the afternoon. The materials box now has a couple of additions in it. Some of it I realized I should change. I made up some little coloring sheets with facts from the watershed report about our trees and our canopy. So we had coloring out, and we had a fair number of families stop by, mostly to color, but we talked at them while they did.
Right. It was very effective. The kids were sitting there coloring away, talking to their parents, and maybe somebody read the information material and all their kids.
Yeah, so good to connect with folks and handed out a handful of our brochures, handful of the info sheets about joining the board. Lovely day in Bedford.
One person, at the end of the day, we thought they might be interested in joining the board. It's not like it's really serious, but it lasts all the way when we actually start using it.
We had a chance to talk a little bit with their friends. We're asking about new members on the board. And Sound like. We had several applications. That application. I didn't press it too hard. One person came to a board meeting.
I can give it a very much. A minor update. I also spoke with Mayor French. It seems like the applications that have been made, those applicants either don't want to move over or they're not responsive to this.
I'm just kind of holding back on this one person.
And you keep in mind that we have on us, so even if more than 7 people are interested, we can have up to 200. So if you have people interested, by all means, send something.
I'm looking at the encourage this woman to do. Whatever you're supposed to do, you encourage her to do it.
Yep.
She met her, this one, 3 more does. Don't forget to try. Hopefully she'll call it.
Just to reiterate, Corey did a wonderful job. Planning and setting it up. Including some place cut outs. Yeah.
I have one of them on the table. They're in the box. They're on little cardboard trees that you can pop together and stand up on the table. And I made a little brochure folder that's in there to stand up. So.
There's even guys, but I would call the citrus trees and. Regular
They
ones.
don't stand up particularly well, so I take them to the table. Yeah.
I already had some cool earrings just for the room.
I did. I forgot to wear them tonight. I made myself late for a party.
Yeah.
It's just one thing, but I see bands are gonna move quieter.
You're directly in front of the stage.
Especially in front of the band, and sometimes it's kind of hard to talk to people. A lot of people came by and we, and thanks to Victoria's tolerable. Stayed engaged for quite a long time.
We weren't as popular as the Camel, but you know.
Yeah. I don't think the can was there to be headed. See.
Yeah,
You was, you're good.
But I did think, the climate people had a nice idea too, and I think. Thought of this before, just didn't think about it. It's a nice way to kind of do some polling. So they had a board to put out different stages of concern about climate change. It's a very simple kind of. Where do you see yourself on this chart? Probably something like that. Gauging public sentiment on these.
Yeah.
It's listed. There's also another application.
Absolutely.
Any other reports or announcements? Here you want to talk about some stuff relating to the council, I don't know if that's. I don't see anybody's else with that, so you better do it now.
Well,
Sorry, Mark, Jeff, I know we're good thing, but.
okay, I have a comment, it's a tree diameters in that part of the agenda.
Okay, all right.
Otherwise, I mean, really, the thing council's working on now is the budget and comprehensive plan. You gave your feedback to the planning commission, they're on the verge of officially sending it to the council. But we'll be working on both of those later this year. And there'll be opportunities for public, I don't know if it'll be no house, just a public comment period. That'll be on both the budget and the comp plan.
Very shared with me, from Mark mentioned, I guess, that any changes we want to make. Basically, anything tree related, we're probably gonna end up packaging all into one package. My explanation is always kind of controversial things like the tree list, sending forward, but that's not the way the council works, and the council has to do everything 3 times anyway. It's probably really not very good, probably isn't necessary to do all of this. All right, new business. Oh, sorry, we don't have any other. New business.
So, I think we introduced ourselves. I'm sorry. Should, yes, please. I'm Dick Holstead.
Macy's Reed, also a tree worker. Victoria Kuta.
Coach Rule, Chair of the Free Board.
Mark Phillips, I'm the vice chair. I should point out that, faculty, over faculty, you've got the, part.
Oh.
I mean,
I was from Wow too.
sorry. Which one's better?
It's a trick question. I'm part, so. That's right, and I think I'm on the dark side of this. But yeah, Larry Goldman, I'm the city council liaison for what department? Chemistry.
I'm Drew, third course planner. I teach at Salcedo College. Drew.
And some of you may not know, Drew got married recently, and she's in the process of changing her name on all the documents. Drew Morris to Drew Epping, her home entry thing still says Drew Morris.
Yeah,
Like her official thing for the department. Right.
it broke a lot of links, in my like SharePoint stuff, so it's a good kind of channel thing, like documents I've been shared with people and everything, like. Yeah, I think actually changing my name at work was the most complicated part.
Oh.
So that's been fun.
Anyway, congratulations, yeah. All right.
So as I was leaving the house, my wife said, are you actually taking 8 copies of the 13-page report to the tree board meeting? And I have them here. I'm kind of embarrassed, but if you'd like to have a copy, follow up. Yeah, share with us, if that's helpful. It's not really tree related. I won't try to follow my way through that. So I'm a co-founder of FOR. FOR stands for Citizens Organized to Reexamine Highway 522 through Lakewood. We started about 3 years ago, and we've been at it for a long time. Just a little about me. I spent 20 years at Microsoft, managed data science team, so not a data science itself, managed teams, understand complex capital. Data analytics is capital intensive effort, machines, hardware, and everything in acquiring capital is money is infinite. But in any event, we put this presentation together and we started asking around, and to our surprise, Terry Messens, who is hired as mega projects manager. She has a different title. She is responsible really for all of the major projects and most likely will become the CEO, permanent CEO of Sound Transit. And we were really surprised. We reached out to her several months ago, and all of a sudden we got an opportunity to present to her, and this is what we presented to her. Subsequent to this presentation, she got a hold of Tom French, asked her, he can meet with her. And she got back with him, and she's going to make a terrain walkthrough of Lake West Garden. The other thing that surprised us is Claudia Balducci, who's a King County executive, represents the east side. She's in charge of what's called the System Expansion Committee, so everything goes through her committee, it goes to the board, it has to do with any project. And to our surprise, she's asked us to meet with her. And we didn't expect that. And then to top that all off, we got contact from Roger Millar, who's the head of the WashDOT, and we're meeting with him as well. This happened all of the sudden. And I cannot tell you why. It could be they're just trying to check it off and say, okay, we listen to it, go away. It could be it could be that we might actually be making some progress, because what we have here is not, emotional. Yes, we're losing 370 trees. It's a huge cost to the city. It's a huge cost to the planet. It sets us back from a climate change perspective. Not the only community that's facing adverse impacts from Sound Transit. Part of it is, well, that's just the cost of mass transit. And what we always say at the beginning of every meeting is, course, supports mass transit, we support light rail, and we support expanded bus service. No question about it. We are not NIMBYs, we are thoughtful, organized, and analytical people. So that's what this presentation represents. So the first page really is just, you probably noticed already, the project we're talking about is Stride 3. Stride 3 is one of 3 bus-related projects in Sound Transit. Stride 1 runs from Linwood down to 405 in Woodville. Stride 2 runs from Woodville down to Renton. And Stride 3 runs from effectively 405 in Bothell Way over to the South Shore Line, 145th Street Library Station. So that's the project that we're talking about. The plan comes with a huge cost to Lake Forest Park. We just found out it's 371 trees, including 80 landmark trees, and 70% of all the trees that are meant to be kept up. Stride 3. They have to haul 95,000 tons of debris in and out of Lake Forest Park. They have to move the road over. You all know we have southbound bus, but they decided they had to move the road over and carve into the hillside, cut all the trees down, put in a 16-foot retaining wall. And just to put 95,000 tons of debris in context, the largest carrier in the United States Navy weighs 92,000 tons. So it's a huge amount of dirt debris that has to be hauled in our community. 56% of all the impacted property owners, people that have to give up some or all of their property, live in this part. 50%, actually it's more than that, 50% of all the capital costs for construction management are in Lake Forest Park. There's all kinds of impervious surfaces that are being added, runoff, stormwater runoff is an issue. There's cut through traffic implications. There's loss of parking, both for businesses, customers, short and long term. Driveways of hundreds of private homes and condos will be entering and exit now on a roadway where the bus can travel as fast as 35 miles an hour. There's a I mentioned the retaining wall, and there are currently no acceptable plans to cross the Shedder Creek. I'll get into that. In fact, I'll get into it, I think, on the next page. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Shedder Creek. This is a LiDAR picture of the Shedder Creek. I live, receive northeast, 155th northeast. I live just to the south of that. And I was here in 1997 when there was a big landslide at the top of the hill. Police came, evacuated all of us in the neighborhood and surrounding neighborhoods on either side. It is a fish-bearing stream. It's recognized as having cutthroat trout and salmon. And it's part of, and it has culverts, 3 culverts on either side that are part of WashDOT's requirement to replace culverts. I don't know how much you know about that, but it was a big Supreme Court decision. It's billions of dollars for WashDOT to replace them. This is one of the areas where they have to replace 6 culverts in order to enable the fish passage. So lots of issues around that. So the first thing we encountered with Sound Transit is, so I'm very much about a business case. I want to know what's the value that's being created, and is it worth the expense to create it? And the first argument we got from Sound Transit was the city had written a letter asking for a pause. It took 6 months for Sound Transit to answer it. They answered it on December 3rd, 2022. They said a northbound bat lane reduced the bus time to Lake Forest Park by 2.3 minutes, up to 10 minutes in the most congested. Now, what they're talking about is the afternoon, 4 to 6 p.m. weekday transit time. Sound Transit runs 10-minute bed times, right? Every 10 minutes, bus to work. That's 12 buses. Problem is, and the chart kind of might be a little bit much for you, but they did a study. They used a modeling technique called SYNCHRO. SYNCHRO requires a bunch of data inputs that predicts build and no build scenarios.
they predicted them for 2022 and 2042. So they can compare no bill to bill. This one happens to be for 2042. And what it shows is the amount of time saved. What's interesting here is number one, 62% of the total time saved, according to their own data, is saved between the light rail station and 145th and 30th, where there's a bus stop. Second thing to note is that the measurements are not by city, they're bus stop to bus stop. So in their calculation, bus stop, we're included, that 2.3 minutes is included in the time from the 145th, 30th through the stoplight. That's 1 minute at peak hours plus a 12-second dwell time. And when you take that out, factor the time saved, it comes down to about 1.6 minutes. And we only represent 15% of the total time saved, and that's with calculations that include 145th. So we had a real problem with that. Second thing is, CEO Tim at the time came to the Lake Forest Park City Council. 300 people showed up. He sent a note out to everybody in Lake Forest Park and said, she's coming, she's going to talk about it. 300 people showed up. Obviously, you can't get 300 people in that room. She had to wade through the crowd. She went up, she made her presentation and started the meeting. And realized that's bad idea. So she committed to having another meeting with the community, which I'll get to in a minute. But anyway, her argument was, I'm sorry, I kept it in so argument two. So in this argument two, let's see, one next page, argument two. So she had a meeting, South Transit set up at LFP Elementary. 500 people showed up. And she had her entire staff there. And she was arguing about why you have to have a bat. And it's all on principle. You know, bat lanes are necessary for fast, frequent, and reliable bus service. Okay. BRT to be functional requires a significant number of bat lanes. Okay. It's building a bat lane in LFP, mandated the voters. We voted for it, she said. Well, actually, we looked at the King County voters pamphlet. We looked at the required 8-page mailer that they were required to send to every household in King, Snohomish, and Pierce County. LFP's mentioned twice. And never is there mention in any of this information about bat lane being built. We did not vote for a bat lane. So that's, we kind of figure that out.
What is that? Stand for?
Business, a bus access transit. So a bat lane.
The buses.
So the buses can drive on it, but anybody who has to make a right-hand turn can get in that bat. And I'll talk about that in a minute, because that's actually.
Can I ask a question about argument one? Did they put a dollar amount on the?
No,
Okay.
we did.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Good.
We did. I don't have it with me, but
Right.
it's 3 times higher than, on a per mile basis than any other mile that they're going. Seriously,
Oh, the cost to them.
yes,
Versus,
60% of the cost of construction and property acquisitions is here. It's 1.3 miles. It's going to be way expensive to build that one road going in one direction.
right, and they're only calculating time saved. People.
On the bus, between 4 and 6 p.m., that's 12 buses.
Yeah.
Argument number 3, and I actually, unfortunately, have a couple of different presentations that I passed out because it costs a fortune for me to print these out in color. But actually, to go to argument 3. Sorry, I'm not following along because I have one. So argument 3, at the meeting at Lake Forest Park Elementary, I stood up and asked a bunch of questions similar to what I was doing here. How can you calculate 2.3 minutes when it's by bus stop? What's the cost that's for this roadway? Bernard Van de Kamp, who is the lead guy, staff guy in charge of this project, could not answer those questions, even though he had his entire staff. And he was fumbling around, and Julie Tim took the microphone and said, we'll meet with you. So on October 3rd, we met with them at their offices. Tom French went, Lord Willie went, there were two people from the Sturgeon Foundation, myself, and a guy that I work with is a PhD and ran, did all the science in our data sciences team. And they came and they said, well, here's the reason why we need to build. And you know, okay, this is you can do this too. You can go do a Google traffic map and you can see all that red and that it's 5 to 14 minutes. You know, delay. So what, that's why we're building the lane. Well, we went back and go to the next page. We said, next page. So we went back and we said, okay, we'll pull every week at 5:10 on Wednesday. And what you see is 3 to 7 minutes, 3 to 8 minutes, 4 to 12, 3 to 10, 3 to 7. They picked the one time that was the largest average maximum time. What it told us, and my friend, Nathan Galton is his name, is there's variance in data, right? It isn't that way all the time, all 2 hours long. So the question becomes a matter of what's the probability, what is the maximum delay, and what's the probability of a maximum delay? So you can go to the next page. So Denton and I figured out a way to pull raw Google traffic data. This is a lot of data, it pulls down, it's gigabytes and gigabytes of data, but it gave us 10-minute increments, minimum, maximum, and average, median actually, of travel in 10-minute increments throughout the day so that we could isolate the weekday, 4 to 6 p.m., and we could study not only the entire roadway, 1.3 miles, but we divided it into 3 sections. We divided it into 145th to 153rd, 153rd to 165th, 165th to town center. Because we suspected that there's going to be variance in each of these sections. They're all different. So you can go to the next page. And what we discovered was that, yes, there is a real problem between 145th and 153rd. The maximum delay is 3 minutes. There's a 61% probability you're going to hit that maximum delay during the weekday or 6 p.m. time. But between 153rd and 156, even though the maximum is 5% or 5 minutes, there's only a 2% probability of hitting that. And then you flip over to 165th and 41st, it's 54%. Neither of the lights, none of the lights between 145th, 153rd, and 165th and town center are signal lights. Now, what signal lights is, bus has a transmitter that's on the bus. When it approaches a light, the light recognizes that and changes the light so that the bus can go through. None of those are signal lights. So no modeling was done by Sound Transit to say what happens if we signalize the lights in those 2 areas, which cause the delay in those 2 parts of the roadway. So we've dissected, in our opinion, through data analytics, raw traffic data, what we discern to be the problem. So we asked a simple question: why are we building anything between 153rd, crossing McAleer Creek, down to 165th? That's where all the cost is, because they have to plow into the roadside, take a whole bunch of land. Reason Sound Transit gave for doing that, moving the road west, was they wanted to avoid 9 full property tails. In other words, if they had not moved the road over, and they tried to build the road all on the east side, they would have had to take 9 people's homes. So now it went to 0, except it's now at 3, because they've gone back and they've started talking to people about how much property they need to have. And those people are going, I can't, I not only have a place to park 1 car, I can't have friends over. And I take my entire property. And we know that that number is now 3. And it could easily rise to 6. So the whole notion of, we have to move the road because we don't want to do full property tax is not going to happen. It's going to involve full property tax.
And Jeff, so if it were possible to do it on that's the east side of your country.
Yes.
If it's possible to do it on that side, which is a difference in terms of trees and.
Well, you wouldn't do anything between 153rd and 165th. And there's no reason to take the roadway west between 165th down to town center. There's no reason to do that. You can just build the roadway, continue the roadway on the east side. So there would be literally no trees taken out. I don't say no. There may be a handful of trees that get removed when you make that kind of decision to move the road. So, I think the next page.
Before you go, John, what about the area south of where it's at?
So there's no plan to move the roadway west. There may be tiny.
There are plans to build next lane there.
Yes, and what that's gonna do is take out businesses. Ranging from the Taco Bell, to the strip club, to the other various small businesses that are along the road. Davy Tree is probably gonna lose a bunch of their property, but it's south. Well, it's here. Yeah. So, so then we started really looking into what are they doing on the shipment to cross the shipment. First plan they had involved doing these giant pilings.
So how about the section north of 165th Street? I had just on 165th Street. Section north of that. Your side.
There would be property loss, some property loss, but there's I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 homes along there. And there's already a portion.
There's on the east side.
On the
lake side.
Yes, yeah, on the east side. Whether there was one home that they might use stuff there, which was in the original plan. The original plan said we were going to lose 10 homes. 9 of them were between 153rd and 165th. There was one home, I know they have secretary.
They've done it for, they're planning to look at the analysis of the traffic backup now that the light rail stuff is for people who might not be traveling on Lake City Way because they're now seeing light rail.
Well, I don't know how to answer that question. It's so new.
It is new.
I know Larry has been very vocal, I think. Said everything to say about the quality of the bus service that's going through Lake Forest Park. We're down to 2 buses.
Well, for now, it's fine. It's next year, transit service will be tough in the first part, but that's a separate issue.
Yeah. And so the main thing, again, it doesn't have anything to do with boring, because there's already a bus. So whether you push over on the west side and put it, effectively build a new lane there, it has 0 effect on how fast the bus goes through Lake Forest Park.
Yeah.
There's already a bus in there.
Really, that's the issue. Hasn't been really raised. Morning is when you really need to get work on time.
Yeah, you have no problem. Well, I don't see
10 minutes late getting home. Because traffic is really bad. It's a little less critical. Be 10 minutes late getting your first lunch.
And the bulk of the time that would delay people is the 20, let's see, from 30th, so the 5th, it's 25 plus 4, 29 blocks from the light rail station to the bus stop at 130. That's where the problem is. And the way that they're solving that problem is signalizing light at 150, at 15, 145th. And the other lights that exist, I can't tell you exactly crossroads. They're signalizing all those lights, and they're putting in roundabouts, as you probably will know, on the east and west side of I-5, which is paid for, by the way, by Shoreline and various federal grants, and will take another 18 months to complete them. But there'll be no lights there. The idea is that speeds traffic up. They also are building what's called a Q jump on 15th Avenue and 145th. Q jump is where they go over and they carve out a little section for the bus to pull over. It's usually maybe 100 yards before the light. So they're going to do that at 15th, on 15th and 145th on both sides. And there's a bus stop on the east side, east of 115. So the bus can pull over, the light signalizes, it goes through there, that's all they need to do, and they stay 62% of the whole building versus no. So we're asking, why are you doing what you're doing here? You do not have, in our view, a business case.
Yeah,
This is taxpayer money.
yeah.
And when you boil it down and you look at what the impact of not building the road at all in this 13 blocks, but putting in a QPAS, or they call it QPAS, basically the bus stop that's at 153rd and Bothell Way is going to be moved to the south. And they're going to create a carve out for the bus to pick it up. There's already so they pull up, but there's a bus stop currently on the north side of that. And there's a bus lane. So there's the bus can light signalized, people get on the bus, the bus comes over, cuts over, and then they have to drive through general purpose traffic. And the argument that Sound Transit made, which didn't work out very well for them, is that general purpose traffic in Lakeland's part is going to get worse. And when you look at their own data, because you have 2022 and 2042, and you can do no build to no build, there's no change in general purpose traffic by their own prediction in Lakeville's part. It's as bad as it's going to be for 20 years. So we've really been, I don't want to say aggressive, but we've been very vocal when we met with Terry Massins. And then all these other things happen, and I don't know.
Or what are her incentives?
Well, Sound Transit,
Spend this money.
so Sound Transit, if you look at, so they've had 3 votes, right? One's right there, S1, S2, S3. And essentially they were granted $100 billion by the voters in those 3 different things. The current estimate for the completion of the entire plan as it exists today, the current estimate is $160 billion. Now, their tax never ends, but they're dependent on the tax never going away. They're also dependent on ridership. And I don't want to comment on ridership, it's anybody's guess. I took the train to the game and it was full. We got on at Motley Terrace, one stop before Linwood. It was full coming back. I can't tell you, I've been on it, I don't know what the numbers are, or my own sort of impression. I was thinking I would go down at like 7:30 and look. I haven't done that, but I will. But that's still only one person looking at one day. So really what they need to do is start reporting, and they will, but they're reporting when it's flags about 60 days, what the onboarding times are. And they have to divide that between morning and afternoon. And that's not always easy to do with the data.
How are they justifying the spend of the?
Because they want to put a full bat lane like this park in there. They can't hide. You know,
I'm sure they're trying to squeeze every minute they can out of it without thinking about the societal impact.
or the impact on taxpayers, because if they don't, they will free up around $200 million. And they are so over budget, so many other things. Transportation construction costs in the last 12 months have increased, according to the national data coming from the transportation department. Mega project transportation costs, construction costs, capital costs for building things increased 16%. This project has not been estimated for 2 years. So this project, all the $580 million is going into capital cost of construction. But I think maybe one of the reasons is they know that this project is going to cost way more, $580 million.
So why not just leave it and report that back to the taxpayers?
Use it to accommodate the increased costs. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, there are other higher priority projects.
I think I can a little bit answer the question. If I put my brain in this business, some transit planner, I quite frequently take the bus in the afternoon from Woodinville here. And you're sitting there in the bus and you're cruising by all these people and stuff. This is not place because you've got that wonderful free lane. It's a really nice thing to have. You look at you you know, if I was a town transit representative, well, wouldn't it be nice if we could do this on the other side?
Yeah,
And
so
I'm guessing that's kind of the basis of the whole thing. It really works very, very well going in. I let you talk about the part. Sure, what more question?
in Bothell, they're not running the bus on Bothell Way. Actually, they are, because Bothell Way makes that turn, but turning bus to run it by the apartment complexes. And then run it through 2-lane roads, there's 2 stoplights and 2 stop signs. That's the right thing to do. Take the bus for people, right? I have no problem with that. But when you say we have to have all these bat lanes, building this bat lane here takes the total bat lane coverage of strike 3 and increases it 7%. And that's only in one direction.
I think the other point is, it's kind of, you still need to look and see, lane all the way through there, with all the crosses. But people who made that plan didn't really look and see, yes, but it's steep here, it's flat.
That's right. The terrain is really,
Which is, we don't have a very favorable terrain.
Yeah. So I was gonna say that, Sound Transit has presented 2 plans to Washington. It's Washout. Washout has a final say about what they can and can't do. They presented an original plan that was gonna put would extend the bridge, that's a bridge, by the way, that goes over there. They're gonna build a whole new lane on the east side, and Washout next to them. Then they came back with a plan that they would truncate the left turn lane southbound. They would truncate that to 50 feet and then push the traffic over and get rid of the sort of median along there. Washington said, no, that's not providing emergency vehicles enough opportunity to turn around and go down 153rd, 155th, and all the turnoffs that go along all the way down. So they nixed that. And what Terry Mess's told us is we're 60%. I know somebody at WashDOT, and they have not submitted their 3rd plan. And so they're,
I can add a little bit on that.
right.
So there is a 3rd plan. It actually, Mark Hoffman might be able to add on it. And I'm not an engineer, but they're basically going to cantilever on the extra lane onto the existing bridge. So not an engineer, but my understanding is that they can widen the road over the creek without needing to build support structures into the creek.
They do have to build a support structure for the site. So they probably can't get a plan through. But this gets back, okay, so you can do that. But what's the overall business case?
As of now, they haven't officially, I think they've been formally showing it to WashDOT and to the city, but they haven't officially posted it yet. Mark, we can't see you in the camera at the moment, but is that accurate?
They've talked in concept about 3 possibilities. They have a design that they're calling the 100% design that shows the cantilever, but that's in their world. In our world, they haven't submitted anything for review, and the only thing we've processed is critical area permits for geotechnical investigations around nearby the creek. Those are intended to inform that future design. If in the end it supports what's shown in the 100% design, which is on our website, we'll know when they apply. But it could also mean a different design. But I think they pulled 3 boreholes away and decided not to pursue critical area permits right by the ravine, which tells me that use of the existing infrastructure and that cantilever Councilmember Goldman mentioned is probably what we're going to see proposed.
So they could easily have this approved by WashDOT. Not an engineer either, but I'll learn about that. Certainly I do. But Terry Mestis in their meeting a week ago said they at best were at the 60% design for crossing.
And that's you think they shouldn't do that.
Well, the bat lane in our judgment, based on the data that we put together, doesn't need to be there from 153rd, actually, because there's already it's called a Q jump on the north side of 153rd. There's just a bus stop there, moving the bus stop to the other side. So it's, not 13 blocks, it's probably 12, and then it would make sense for them to do a bus pull out and move. I don't know if they're, Mark might know this, whether they're moving the 165th bus stop to the south, or whether they're leaving it where it is. But either way, they can build, if they wanted to, they could build, a bus pull out. Just on the south side of 165th, the bus pull out on the north side of 165th, signalize the light. And, those things combined together, when you start looking at building an entire full bat lane and how much time that actually saves, it can't be a whole lot of time. Just can't.
No, and the reason criticize the figures, but if the officers say don't anticipate increased traffic next 2 years.
No, not
Considering how much increase there has been in the last 2 years.
You know what? They have a model. We have the inputs. The model they used did not take into consider, there's in the model, you can do an input weights right-hand turns. There's 47 of them between 145th and town center. And you could put in a weighting value model between 0 meters, no problem, to 3 meters, a big problem. And they put in 0. So if you were to, I don't know what the result on modeling would be if you put in 3, but it doesn't take, anyway, I don't want to get very far into their modeling because I'm not an expert.
But it's their own data.
Yeah, I mean, it's their data. They're the ones, if they have no build scenario in 2022 and no build 2042, and you look at the time difference, and there's no difference.
Big increase in the last 20 years or something. 12 bridge.
Yeah.
Which caused a lot of people to try.
I drive that road all the time, because I have to come up 155th, and I frequently do it during the 4 to 6 p.m. And who could predict the future? In fact, you were like you would say, in my experiences, there isn't really any benefits. That's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. What matters is how reliable can you predict traffic in the future? They've got a model, and they use that model to make decisions, and that model shows no increase in general purpose traffic.
And it's so different now too, with the options for people to be earlier working from home. It's just different kind of escalation in traffic than happened 20 years ago to now versus 20 years ago into the future.
And the one thing we have said to Terry Mastis, Rick Kapka, who's the chief engineer on Strike 3, is we're not going public. There's a win here for everybody. There's a win for transit riders, a win for taxpayers, there's a win for South Transit. And we can do the right thing. And there's no point in making this big public display, hire PR people who can do. We're not doing it because we believe there's a win for everybody. That's been our position.
So have you guys made any proposals of alternatives?
Yeah.
You've named a number of parts of it throughout. Do you have?
We presented Terry Mastis, so don't build it here and there.
You've
Yeah.
named a number of different pullouts and queue jumps and things that
Yeah.
would kind of solve as alternatives to
Well,
the.
which would
the
mitigate
back.
even further the issue. But we've been we didn't hold that, this is the deck we went to. And in the past, we were thanked, we never heard another word. And now we have, and like I say, I can't explain why. It could be easily that they just want to check the box off. They get our job, they're going to say, thank you very much, you're wrong, we're building an effort. that easily could be the reason why all these people have suddenly decided they want to sit down and talk to us. But they all have this. They all have this, so it's not like we're hiding it.
Next steps are to
Have these meetings,
Yeah,
see what happens. I mean, we're not, what's peculiar is that we're not meeting with Roger Barr till October 18th. And, that's getting, so their plan is to let the contracts. So they divided the road into 3 sections: Bothell, Kenmore, Lake Forest Park, and Seattle Shore. It's kind of 3 sections. The other 2 sections on the far ends are the idea that what they're currently slated to do is let those contracts in Q3 of 2024. Q3 is almost up. What they said was that our contract would not be available. We'll push out there for bids until Q4 of 2024. But, you know, when you haven't re-estimated the cost of building this in 2 years, and construction cost for large projects has gone up the way it has gone up, you know it's not going to come in at the numbers with $581 million. It's not. It's going to be.
I can also add from the city side, the council received the letter in which Double Bridge. And about a month ago, we had the city basically made their own red lines on the Sound Transit plans to show where the future would go at 153rd.
And the thing about that was, it didn't take that much time. So the notion that there's a big, you know, huge, complex design issue seems to me to be, you know, one who could sort of challenge that game of basically. Right?
Yeah.
I think it's, for me, it's impressive that they were able to make the sacrifice getting away from a dedicated lane on 145th.
Well, that was never really considered as the cost of moving all the utilities. Mark probably was way. The cost of moving utilities, number of ADJs wasn't practical.
But it was a cost issue.
It was a cost.
It's been wonderful to have a, lane.
But it's amazing what signalized lights, a couple of one QPass, and a roundabout does in terms of saving time.
I guess that was sort of my point.
Yeah.
There are less powerful government entities.
Yeah.
The shoreline of Seattle, cutting out chunks of full shoreline in Seattle, they extended that.
Yeah.
It's a little easier to cut out chunks of the forest park.
But anyway, I should leave you to conduct the rest of your business. I apologize that I didn't show up, but in a way, I'm glad because we have learned a lot in between. Same with the break to you as well.
Yeah, how do I stop sharing?
It's right to just below that and to the right. Down. And now to the right. Yeah. Keep going, keep going.
Oh,
There.
stop share right there. I'm a team person, so.
I would ask Mark, any comments or like, you know, on this?
We're busy, working out questions and answers under a pre-application agreement with Sound Transit. We're not fed much information other than warnings of what's coming. That won't change for me in my world until they hand us an official application.
Yeah.
I don't know when that is, but all the efforts that were mentioned tonight can continue regardless. And when those applications come in, they will be a right-of-way corridor, tree permit, critical area permits, retaining wall permits, civil review, you name it. A lot of those are administrative, and there is no overarching transportation permit approval for the city. So I think these efforts are the way to go if there's going to be a change.
And we talk frequently to Tom and Lori in particular. Let them know what we're doing, talking to. We're informing one another. I think we got a copy of this after the city created It's amazing, really, really, in the cities out there working very hard, in my opinion, working really hard to do the right thing.
Imagine Lori's concerned with people pretty much right through her backyard.
Goes through a lot of people's backyards.
But her house more or less backs up Swamp Way.
Yeah.
North of.
Yeah.
So,
And what happens if they submit a plan that not like we discussed here? Does the city have any recourse after that? For the citizens?
Well, as I said, we're sticking with saying that we're not going to fight this out right now.
Yeah.
Because we think there's a win for everybody. If we're successful, we go home. And if we're not successful, the process. I mean, we have the ability to raise money, but the appetite is to raise it, spend it, and make some sort of public thing. Rather be reasoned adults and come up with the right decision that benefits everyone.
Yeah, for sure. Is the city forced to approve the permits that are required for a plan that is in line with that?
Well, there is no city overall approval for the plan, the BAT plan.
You have to approve the permit and stuff.
Then the use is allowed. And so those permits, the short answer is no, we're not required to approve them. But any approval or denial is based on the code criteria for that type of permit, not for the time savings or, the impacts. A good example is the tree permits that come in. They couldn't be denied in a way that this project can't happen. They could be denied for not meeting the criteria in the tree ordinance.
but then the first lawyer came along and said, yeah, but you approved these permits for these 15 people's backyards, and they were no more out of alignment with the law than we were.
Yeah, we're code administrators,
Yeah.
so like our personal opinion about a situation is not, what we're really looking at. It's
No,
does
I
it meet, the code requirements, and so
Understood.
if it meets that, but isn't ideal for the community,
Right.
we're just looking at does it
Something.
fulfill,
Yeah, understood.
We basically, we helped rewrite the code about this last year in anticipation of this issue, but it still has to, say if they meet the code.
Well, one of the things the tree board was directly involved in is if a bunch of trees are removed, where do they get replaced? Because if 300 trees are removed, you're not going to be able to get 300 new trees along 522. And so the tree board was involved. Okay, well, what's the backup plan for replacing trees?
So there was buried in the seed. I'd have to go back and look and figure out where they were going to buy carbon credits at some location in East Cape County. I don't know enough about that. I just read that in the seed.
I don't think that would align with our code requirements.
Yeah.
It's part of the.
No,
It's in the
Yeah,
seed, but
totally.
they can give us money. I don't think they can give money to somebody in King County. I mean, the code that we wrote says, in lieu payments, and I forget what how they're on the order of $8,000 per tree that they take out or can't replace.
Well, I'm, as a citizen, I'm really grateful. But in particular, I think Mark and his team are absolutely going to do the right thing as judge it by the code and it's not an emotional thing. But I think our tree code is really, really important and really good, and probably one of the best tree codes, I think, in the city or in the county. And as a citizen, I'm really grateful.
One of the questions I got at the event this past weekend was particularly for potential tree permits around this project. Is there anything included around monitoring for actual, did replacement trees get planted did they survive, et cetera? And I wasn't able to answer well.
Yeah, so our code requirements, it's in a few different areas, so, but I know the minimum number I've seen that would be associated with this is 3 years.
Okay.
Post monitoring and replacement.
Okay.
And that includes inspections for that, stuff's actually planted and whatnot. It could be higher than that in some sections of the code, depending on if there's critical areas or other requirements, but I know the minimum amount I've seen is at least 3 years.
Who enforces
Well, it also
Everyone does. No, everyone does.
So again, if they're partnering with KCD to administer this, or that's covered in what we'll talk about too, with just the replanting update later, what I'm talking about. But that would also be potentially a contract with a company that is responsible for doing that monitoring. That's for 3 years. Right?
And if it's critical areas, it's either 5 or 10 years.
Yeah. So, and it also depends on what kind of flexibility the code gives us as administrators to determine that number higher if we feel it's appropriate, or if we need to stick by, certain things. So it's something that we haven't dug into too much until we need to, just because.
Probably also worth pointing out that I would guess that this project will be far better monitored than the average permit is. Because nobody has ever checked to see if I've had trees in my backyard.
Yeah, which again,
Well, I mean,
part of our permit tracking stuff and,
Right, this will be probably more professionally and thoroughly tracked than all the rest of the permits.
So
That's actually one of the things I worry about least.
I'm hearing we can't say no, but we can make it really expensive.
We can
it
be
depends on what you get an application, which we haven't got.
Yeah.
we can be detail oriented and diligent.
Yeah. And then the one other thing I'd just say from the number of trees coming out perspective, just in if we're looking at just pure what they're saying in the table, it could be around those numbers, but there are some nuances that I think are worth considering. I think there are a lot of large quality trees that will be affected by this, but a lot of those numbers are also coming from cherry laurel, black locust, butterfly bush, which are invasives and more shrubs and things we see. So it is still a really high number, and that is a big deal. But just don't want to, on some level, not sensationalize or over pump it with stuff that we would want to get out of there anything on a different level. So, so I think looking at the number of significant or landmark trees, the higher exceptional trees coming out, those bigger numbers of quality vegetation is more realistic of just what it's going to be impacted tree wise. But
I think, I could be wrong here, that their tree count is anything with a DBA of 6 inches.
yeah,
So that's small. That's not a big tree.
any woody material.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what the tree goes in. That's what our tree code has been around.
Yeah, but I recall that.
Yeah. But I mean, that's how the tree code doesn't really regulate anything.
They've already marked a bunch of them. They're little pink flags.
Yeah. Well, some of those pink flags we put up.
Possible.
I was.
For visual.
I wasn't for that. Other people.
I didn't. Flag on the list, they're supposed to come out as a community education thing, not as a actual
On this page here, you look at that one, you're obviously.
The impact on LFP.
Prior residents, they work part, are they all?
Yeah.
Says 80 landmark trees is 70% of all trees. Well, I'm not even sure what that means.
Well, there's based on the tree inventory that we saw, that's an older view of the tree. So, but it's 70% of all the trees that Sound Transit has in their list to remove, and that's every tree. I think those trees have to be 6 inches in DBA or more.
Significant trees are 6 inches or larger, and then landmark are 24 inches.
Yeah, so that's any tree that they plan to cut down 6 inches or larger across the entire roadway. But there's nothing. The only thing they're doing in Kenmore is upgrades to bus stops.
I'm just not sure what the 70% is.
It's 70% of
80 out
all.
of 400.
It's 371 is 80% of all. 70% of all the trees that they say they're going to cut down. It's on their tree list for the whole For the whole section, the whole.
For all of
Yeah,
stripe.
for straight off of.
Okay.
All of straight.
Okay,
So
yeah, okay.
70%
Just-
of stripe for the whole tree.
Right.
For the whole project.
Not the landmark trees, or 70% of the trees.
Here,
They are.
the count that we saw last, which is older, was, here it was 80 landmark trees. And that's using their tree inventory.
That's.
And those plans are on our city website as well, inventory table, so.
Yeah,
if that
yeah.
wants to-
And then they've updated it because the number keeps changing. Well, at one point it was like 450 and then it was 425 and they'll keep updating it. Naturally, their plans get closer and closer to complete. They get a better idea of what they're going to take.
But if they move the lane to the other side of the road, all what, you'd have to start over.
Well, that assumes the lanes will be over to the fence, that they're,
Oh,
yeah.
And if you're looking for where it is in the plan, just because they're really big books, it's in book 1 of 3, just so you're not.
Oh, they're
Yeah,
huge.
page like 82.
Yeah, correctly, I have to be an engineer to figure those out. I mean, that's normal, right? It's a big construction. Well, that was more than 20 minutes. I apologize for that.
very good. Thank you.
Now, I see you had something in here about,
Yes, I see that too, actually.
BRT update.
Yeah, Mark, you're supposed to be the 4th item on the list. Can we move you up to the 2nd item on the list?
I wouldn't mind at all.
Right. We
Yeah,
just did-
so we partially did, it's just kind of like if they're moving forward with their current expectations and plans. We just had like some internal discussions about, expectations for replanting for Sound Transit and just requiring them to have a very thorough examination of private and public land locations, and that they're the ones planning and administrating, all of that. It sounds like their plan is to partner with KCD, but that's really gonna be up to them, but that the city's not gonna be like looking for little spots on private and public land for trees to go, that the burden for doing that is gonna be on them with this project. You're gonna review that plan and can make adjustments and, requests and everything above it, but that we're not going to be finding all of those spots. But our expectation for them is to be really thoroughly fine tooth comb through the city and our priority planting areas to find locations for actual trees and avoiding the in lieu option as much as we can. So.
And the in lieu is great as I think it is. We could buy 4 or 5 more arborists for 20 trees.
If I could ask a question about that. Is it possible, I know the city's not gonna be actively looking, but could the city send out, say, a mailer to the neighborhoods that are in the priority for planting areas to let them know, hey, Sound Transit has a lot of trees that need to get replanted. If you're interested, give a shout.
Yeah, I'm definitely happy to work with, whoever they're choosing to like help build this plan, everything. We're not quite there yet. But I think we just we're trying to just all get on the same page of that we have high expectations for them to be putting together the mailers, and doing this kind of thing and reaching out, finding these spots, and that we're happy to be a part of it. Or if we've got stuff on our city parks, pushing those areas and doing that kind of thing, but that it won't come from the city to be reaching out and doing that.
Well, I think the expectation might be depending on what KCD we were just talking about.
So KCD could look on the map and say, oh, this neighborhood is a priority area. Let's send postcards to them. It's there.
Yeah, they ought to. I mean,
Yeah.
That's
So, and yeah,
But
so our
that's cool.
expectation is that those things are gonna happen, but we're not gonna administer them because it's just staff
Yeah.
capacity and.
interesting.
By the way, somebody asked me, what are the chances of succeeding? And I said they went from 1 in a billion to 1 in a million. Yeah, we're doing our best.
It's a lot of encouragement.
That's 1,000-fold increase.
I'm
Look at the bright side, right?
so shocked that something that would save them so much more money is something they would.
Well, when you're spending 160 billion,
Yeah.
200 million, it's like a nickel.
So the whole budget.
Yeah.
Just.
We're all making sure. All right, so that good covers that before.
Thank you. I really do appreciate the time, and again, I'm sorry that I can't. You know, we had more information to pass on. So,
Yeah.
uh,
Great.
And thank you.
Good luck with the future conversation.
Well, fuck it. We're having coffee with Claudia Balducci. I'm wondering who's gonna buy.
Nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you. Thank you all for your time.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Thanks.
But every so often common sense breaks through. And if everybody knows the people were, you know, when the people were ready to go to war, and when some common sense told them,
Yeah.
it's not a very good idea, they didn't. Common sense will go
That's
through
great.
this.
We were just up there this past weekend. That's why I wasn't on the picnic. We were in San Juan.
Okay, the tree list. So everybody should seen it.
Yeah, there's also a copy of the agenda.
Agenda, right?
It's like, hold on.
Pretty clear, a lot of work.
I thought it was a lot of fun.
Yes.
No, I think it's so great, dramatically improved.
Or night mode.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Why? Such a bad Zoom user.
So the thing about the background here is that Drew, Dick, and Mark and I spent part of an afternoon in her office. Where your office? Here,
Yeah.
okay, here. Looking at the list and just sort of going down page by page and idea by idea, thinking where we wanted to make changes. And ended up with a page full of notes as to Drew then sort of applied to the tree list and also wrote this is all additional verbiage that wasn't there before. And I think it really explained very, very well over how the thing works. And then the final page, which is this, I want to say prescribed trees. Sounds so much like prescribed, but I don't want to say that. Anyway, bad trees. That's also a brand new thing to put in, and then the wording there is also.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and having this section about what not to plant is also supported with language in the code of saying that they will have a section about what not. to plant.
The code said it was there long before it was. Anyway, you all had a chance to look at it. Are there any further comments on it, or we just say this is ready to go to the council and the council is ready to listen to it?
I noticed a couple of things. And, you know, after that first meeting, I was really not involved with this. But, you know, the pretty technical stuff. On that very first page, I noticed two service berries that have the same scientific name. Is that just the way it is? In that case, the autumn brilliance and the old select.
Yeah, so they're different cultivars. So like if you see the canopy area is quite different for both of them.
Yeah.
And that's because like the cold select is going to have a more narrow size, you know, be a bit smaller. So it's bred to be kind of different size and different form than the other one, even though they're both the same species.
So that gives a common name to the stages.
Yeah.
Some species will have dozens of, or the cultivars for one species.
They look just down here, two more, we have two, Causa dogwood, dogwoods, again, different cultivars.
I mean, same scientific.
However, I think the two Amelanchier exgrandiflora probably ought to be set in place alphabetically.
Why are some golden on the common name?
They added native.
Oh, got it. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, that,
Yeah, that's a nice feature.
since this is alphabetical by scientific name, but Amelanchiers probably should be. So,
Yeah, let's just argue that. And then I think, and also I pulled this from Excel into Word so we could track changes. And a few like little descriptions and words didn't quite make it over. Like in a few of the descriptions, it was just like great in like, you're like, what was it great in? So
How do you alphabetize X?
we see anything like that.
How do you alphabetize exgrandiflora versus flavors? Count the X.
Oh, there's another grandiflora at under the label.
Yeah, that's what I'm concerned about. They're separate in the alphabetical list,
Oh, yeah.
but I'm not sure whether they should go above or below labels. I'm not sure whether you count the X.
It's a vastly improved, but
one technical detail I just noticed is that places where you have, let's look at the flowering crab apples.
Yeah.
Under the scientific name, you have Malice, SPP period, should just be one.
Oh, yeah,
SPP refers to multiple species.
yeah. I don't know
These
what,
are each just individual. There's probably a few more down in the Prunus. I'll say that is some specific species that is not specified here. One of the reasons.
that might have been how it was in the old ones,
I wouldn't be surprised.
so. Yeah, I can find out what they are for the other ones too.
Be nice to have the species name.
Yeah. That would be a little iffy.
Speaking of dogwoods again, on that first page, I guess those are cultivars.
Yeah, it seems like there might have been a different cultivar that was listed for the one above Satomi that like didn't get transferred properly, so I can take a look at that.
Right, and then later in the list, when they're larger trees, such dogwood again comes up. And there's Eddie's White, White Wonder. No, hybrid. All three of those say that they are resistant to any disease that makes
Anthracnose.
anthracnose. I wonder if the Pacific dogwood ought to have a note that's saying it, just to say that it is susceptible.
Yeah. It's not good.
There's such a thing as a bean cherry.
Yeah, I have one.
That's kind of like my grandmother's backyard. It's a lot of fly.
Edible fruit.
Oh, yeah. Is that on our list?
No, let's take a look.
I think that the cherries on page 2, maybe smaller trees. Maybe what else for any cherries.
Yeah, we can definitely add it like when edible, stuff gets added too. So I don't think we have a ton of on here, so a lot of it has these issues.
Is there any reason that you don't see a lot of fruit trees around? Orchards, seems like.
There has been a pretty big movement for like more edible food forests, and a lot of like grant money for that kind of stuff too. Cambridge was doing a few of them while I was there, and I know Seattle has a huge like urban agriculture movement with adding more fruit trees and edible stuff.
So with apples, there's a very prevalent disease that affects apple trees.
Yeah.
Nothing like that for cherry.
Cherries have a lot of issues too, but they also they're beautiful, people love them, and they have a lot of cultural significance to like the local Japanese community as well, and other things like that. So they're kind of one where it's a little easier to not put apples and other things, but cherries are a tough one to say, because of these issues we're having to have. They're just beautiful and people love them.
This source park is not a great place to go for trees. Park because we have a great forest camp.
Yeah.
Our trees require a lot of sun.
Exactly.
We had a pear, cherry. Yeah, our property, so they all just withered because the conifers around them and everything else just grew up until there were just these things in the shade of bigger trees.
They're great fun.
Wonder if we put one in our backyard in a sunny place, a plum tree in our backyard in a sunny place is a legal replacement tree for the guy to have done. It will bear fruit. We won't strangle it. Doesn't bear fruit. It flowers magnificently, but nothing is fertilized. You could strangle a tree, Mapleton.
Kind of cross-fertilized sulfur.
Well, it was chosen to be self-fertile, but I think we just got a lone tree.
Or else there are pollinators that are trying to flower.
Well, that's what my wife was told. She went out there with a little whisper kind of thing, tried to pollinate them, and it didn't pretty good at all, Larry.
Couple of process questions. Does the city council need to approve this, or is this purely on the administrative side?
So Mark and I have talked about it a lot, and based on how it's written into the code, I don't have it on this one, but I have pulled all the references to the tree list in the code. And because of the way it's referenced in the code, we think we do need it, and it would be a good opportunity to change the code at that time so that we can update it yearly, take a look at it based on changing pets for pets and not have to go to council.
And related, there are two specific references to the June 2023 list.
Right.
So I would propose just deleting the words dated June 22nd, 2023.
Yeah, we're gonna kind of change it to the tree list as amended, or something like that nature. So giving us permission to amend it as we need to, and removing any date for specific thing.
The key is you need an ordinance to amend it if you want the list to have legal standing, the new list. But once you amend it, we can make it easier for the future. by as may be amended by the tree board from time to time, just like Drew said.
That's, you guys will take care of getting that language put together so that we put the rest of our tree related package. So the council, that'll be part of it.
And I suspect from the council standpoint, these are pretty minor changes, so I don't see this part being controversial.
Well, these are, but there are, right when we get past this tree list, talk about those two other items.
Yeah.
Those are a little more
The
complicated.
diameters.
Yeah.
Oh, no, definitely, but in terms of just this about authorizing the tree board and staff to amend the tree, that strikes me as something that should go through pretty soon.
There is one thing that we did last year. I thought I got out. It says that for a right of way permit, the trees have to be selected from the 15 to 30 foot page. And I think we put that in thinking that a lot of the trees would be putting up in the sort of view properties going down the slope of Lake Washington.
I thought it was more because like power lines, that you didn't want to put a 50-foot tree on 522. So the idea that if this was meant to be a street tree, it should be limited in height.
So there's two different sections of the as you go. Yes, two different sections. And one is the right of way, and actually I had seen email to Drew about this week. That's probably a good idea for the right of way, although if you go up 35th, you see big trees and you see them be surviving. But I can see the logic of staying below 30 feet in the city right of way. But the other thing where we're planning replacement trees for a project. I think of two things called right of way project.
Sound transit, or the sound transit, the right of way corridor.
The corridor replacement. I don't see an obvious reason why it should have to be below 40 feet, below 30 feet, because they may end up being planted well away in one of our 100-tree areas.
The code that we approved does say the corridor is 1,000 feet wide. It's 500 feet on either side.
Right.
And so, yeah, if you're 500 feet east of 522, that it can make sense that there would need to be a height restriction.
But does this apply to trees that are planted, doesn't that part of the code also apply to trees that are planted away from the corridor?
Yeah, so I think the issue is the code does not distinguish between a tree that's 10 feet from 522 and a tree that's 500 feet from 522.
Exactly.
And so it was a bit more conservative because those aren't distinct from each other.
Right, but if they find a place, the northern part of the city where, several people want trees, sort of silly to say, well, because this is a corridor replacement, you can only be 30 feet high.
If I could ask Drew then, or Mark, if we took out the 15 to 30 feet, would you still have discretion to say, hey, you're planning to plant a big leaf maple on 522, that's not gonna fly? And so I think the concerns we have are already covered because staff needs to approve tree permits. So it seems to me that we could take out the 15, 30.
For both places. Both for the corridor permits and the right of way.
I mean, I think leaving it in the right of way permit is,
Good idea, actually.
yeah, is not a terrible idea. Because even if there's no existing power lines, who knows when they're gonna restring something somewhere or, or anything. So I don't hate it. The only time it would be annoying is, and that's the same thing where we could take it out, make it staff discretion, like we're usually only gonna approve something that fits there unless there's a good reason, because sometimes they do off-site planting, not in the right way, occasionally, it's very rare, but. So it's just a matter of if we want to meant to say, it has to be this unless otherwise approved by the city's qualified arborists is another option, to set a standard that the expectation in right away is that it's small, but if there's a reason why it doesn't need to be, then we can deviate from that.
Yeah, I think that makes great sense. Presumption will be smaller in the right of way, but as long as your successor approves it.
Yeah,
But on the other hand, for the corridor trees, I think we're hoping a fair number of the corridor trees are going to be planted away from the corridor.
yeah, and like limiting the small ones too, it's also a little difficult because they're gonna have to do replacements based on total canopy. And so if we limit the size of the trees even out of there, then it's a lot more trees potentially,
So as I recall last spring when you were discussing this, before you joined us, one of the topics that came up was adding the line that I do see on the first page here, that additional trees not on the list may be approved for planting if approved by the city's qualified arborist. And at the time, there were questions about like, can we get away with that? Or with the way the code is written, does it have to be from a prescribed list? Or can we basically just say like, or anything through months? Is that something that y'all discussed when you were drafting this, or something that you, based on your knowledge of the code, have thoughts on?
I think in the standalone tree permitting through the city, that it does in the code have flexibility written in, because that's where I pulled this language from. But it doesn't right now in the right of way corridor permit. You know, so that's kind of where if we can just mirror this language potentially in that section, it would offer more flexibility.
Awesome. I have one other language question in the what not to plant. I love the language that we have at the front of the list and on the what not to plant page. I appreciate that in the beginning section, it specifies that this can be used for permit reviews, or just like, if you want to know what good trees to plant are, here you go. And I'm curious if we want to expand on that in the what not to plant and potentially add something like in that first sentence that says, these tree species are not currently approved for replanting requirements in the city due to pest and disease, or invasive tendencies. Do we want the end of that sentence to say like, and are not recommended for planting anywhere in the city or something like that? So we can clearly, it's not just that I won't approve your permit, it's that you really shouldn't plant these things.
Yeah.
Like, please don't.
We could change it and say
Like either in that sentence or in another part of that statement.
That's gonna be.
Yeah.
Not recommended, or not approved for replanting requirements or recommended for any other planting.
oh yeah, that's good.
Yeah, that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. People planting trees have been anywhere near my property. I keep pulling seedlings up. And
Back on that, the bulk of the list too, I noticed there's a few empty cells. Like the shapes of some of the trees that are hard to describe and it's red on its screen.
I think they just didn't have it on the original list, and I just didn't catch that we needed to write a whole.
I don't know
Yeah.
if we need to have something. All of those cells. Well, I don't know if we do either.
Is there,
Yeah.
is there a reason bamboo wasn't included on the what not to plant?
Bamboos aren't trees.
They're not
Correct.
trees. Oh, yeah, they're like grass.
or white dresses.
People see them as trees.
Like,
It don't matter.
The reason homes are on, yeah.
Yeah.
If it were on the plant, not planted, I would put it in bold print at like 18 fonts.
Yeah.
That's several $1,000.
There,
a couple of minor things with respect to what's folded and what's not. Dogwood, Eddie's Rice Hunter is folded, it's native. Hybrid, it should be.
Yeah, you don't think so? I just say because like we're not, so I would rather have people plant that than the straight species in a lot of, cases in more urban areas.
We're not trying. Maybe related, so the current tree list holds native trees. And I think it also asterisks trees that are not native, but are compatible and better performing than the native, so they're acceptable. The new tree list, I don't think has that. Is that deliberate?
Yeah, so with the old list had ones that were like native substitutes, but weren't native, but it wasn't really done with any scientific reasoning as to why those were appropriate. Substitute, like Akusa dogwood was like, oh, this is a native replacement. I was like, why? Other than it also being the same genus, like what evidence do we have that this is an acceptable substitute? So kind of expanding the range of what we're considering native, I think we read it was more appropriate, depending on what it is, just because there's a lot of things not a little outside of Western Washington that could potentially do good here in the right spot. That made more sense as far as like what could be substituted for true native. So we did kind of, and I felt like that was supported in the way the code was written. I don't know if anyone has anything, but I was just like, it just didn't make sense, some of the choices that were made with the native substitutes. Or like, someone's like, why is that an acceptable and this one's not? I didn't have a clear answer for that.
One thing we did do is put in native to Washington, Oregon, sort of with the understanding that climatically Washington is in Oregon. Or is it Washington? Or that's what's
That
happening.
is true.
So in that regard, Ponderosa Pine should also be old.
Oh, is it not right now? Yeah, well, yeah, that,
And right now, they're all bold and asterisk, correct?
yes.
Do we want to specify that in this language at the top that says defines native? Does that, do we want to also say there? Because right now it says at the bottom of each section, you have a little key that says asterisk Pacific Northwest native. Should it seems like it would be helpful to just put it in this statement of like, these trees are,
And upward on each page.
these trees are noted with an asterisk below or something.
Yeah, or you can just remove it to say they're bolded and stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's confusing. If you see a bold and an asterisk, you think it means two things.
Yeah.
Instead of just meaning one thing.
But I like putting that info before getting to the chart, so you don't have to wonder as you're reading the chart what it is, and then you're searching along with the chart for what the key is.
Maybe that's what Eddie's wondering about.
You say, yeah. So here you had a line saying,
In that
yeah, right, they're
bullet
bold.
point, it refers to trees that are native to Washington State or Oregon that have been shown to be well adapted to the area indicated in bold on the chart below.
Okay,
The
They
word
get rid of
state,
those.
the word state after Washington could probably be struck.
Yeah.
Like, Washington DC or someplace else.
never know. The things that would come up,
Yeah.
or that I've had come up in this, you know, the arguments people try to
Yeah.
make would make me very.
Specific.
I make another formatting suggestion.
Yeah,
When a section of the list is over 2 pages, you should put the header on page 2 as well.
yeah, I was planning to do that after we went through this, just because I didn't want to do it and then have us like add or delete something and then have to like redo it, because I can't stand doing the same word twice. So and then I was thinking about also the language, since we have these, the way we have it online is we have them all as separate lists and as one massive list. So I was probably gonna also format them that way, where one list, but then with a separate list, that this same language is at the top of each one if you click on it. So that, yeah, if people are just accessing one part of the list specifically for size they want, that they're still getting
They
this.
should get good stuff, yeah.
And is this going to be posted, this is into details that aren't particularly relevant to today, but will it be posted on the website as like a PDF where you will, the lists may span multiple pages, or is it possible to just do it as like a web page where you just keep scrolling?
PDF's easiest for us to just like swap in and out if we need to, and to be able to distribute to people.
Okay.
So. Let's show you how to do it.
And it's real easy to be able to just download the PDF,
Yeah,
stick it on your computer.
and I
look at
email it
if
to
you want.
people all the time. What would be really cool is to, yeah, that's where it counts, is to have a selector thing if we ever put it online that way, where you can filter by like size, flowering, you know, like it dry or anything like that to kind of narrow down what works for you would be really, yeah, but that's, you know.
Is there anyone at the city who could do that for you? Seems like a database.
Yeah, it's just there's
Yeah. So many.
there's some other projects for us.
Well, if you download a PDF, you can search for spreading, for example. Find all the spreadings in there, but a lot of the things you want to look for are more vague than that.
It's the kind of thing that like my ideal vision of it would be that you have all the PDFs that you can link to and download and email, and then you have it as the web format. It's a master list that's sortable, so that it's a web-friendly version that you access on the website, but you can also download it.
You could upload it as a sortable tricks, right? So like a spreadsheet.
Yeah, like this one is my favorite one. The select tree, and this is what I always send people to. But it's so great, like max height, tree shape, foliage type, leaf form, arrangement, even like it just gives you hardiest, like it's great. Is it, you know, native, are you looking for native, fall color? So yeah, like it's also like an outline to reinvent the wheel, so getting some sort of info.
If you can put a link to that looks really good.
Yeah,
Maybe you can put a link to that on that page you just came back from.
oh yeah, yeah, I can send it.
It's unique, it's specific to California.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not perfect.
salt tolerance, yeah,
I know
really.
The guy who, behind developing this, they were trying to come up with a way to give people trees to plant that fit into city ordinances, like how tall they can be above a certain height if they're planted in the right way and the street sides and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, 'cause
Yeah,
some
this
people,
kind of tool would have been great, like trying to go through the tree list as someone who knows nothing about trees and figure out like none of these words mean anything to me,
Yeah.
but like a slider to select height.
What is your favorite slider?
We had a sapling of the one that we had to remove
Oh,
that we had already started growing.
yeah, and like, it is nice, like, well, it's California based, so like the natives are applicable, there is the, go by ourselves, so.
You're probably, if you're making note about it, they're trying to make a note that includes a lot of trees. Are not on our tree list. Actually, could be.
Well, maybe someday we can be as cool as them.
Yeah, well, I'm sure he was probably like a student project or something.
No, he's on the fact that Cal Poly, I don't know if he may have had something up with that. It was basically for LA, it's not just for a small area like the first part.
Yeah.
behind that website is just spreadsheet.
I was gonna say,
No,
so
it's a relational database,
Oh, okay.
so rather than a spreadsheet.
what student at UDone needs the senior thesis project? We can connect us.
Yeah, aren't we getting, don't we have interns and we talk about having interns?
The interns are booked and busy. Yeah, but if there's anything else we're seeing on here. Reformatting related things, so we got like adding the extra tops on the continued list to other pages.
We only have 25 minutes, right?
Okay, but I think like for the most part, if there's any other tiny little edits, just feel free to send them to me directly.
It's looking awesome. Thank you guys for all the work you put into.
Yeah.
I
Revising.
really like this list.
Yeah,
I think it's really great.
It's
So-
great.
So much more
Do we have a motion to accept this, to make this the official approved list?
That's an
As,
aspect.
as, as amended?
What is the timing on this? Well, I understand. What's the next thing we need to do with it? Do we have time to look at it one more time to officially bless it, or is there some reason why we want to approve it now? Change it. It's good.
Yeah, that's up to you guys. We're not like on any kind of council agenda to like hit it, so there's not like a sense of urgency at all. We're just kind of moving on to the exceptional tree question, so it's like letting, we're gonna close this off and be done and move on to the next thing, or we're.
From a council perspective, I'd like to see this as two separate, again, low bar tree list amendments, let's get that to the council ASAP. And then tree diameters, that's much bigger, be more deliberate about that.
Okay, yeah, I can talk with Mark about that.
Mark, you're the one that said we should do it all at once, so.
The unseen part is all the noticing and transparency and public outreach, and ordinances are not easy. It involves a lot of hours, and so just factor that in. If there's two small code amendments, group them together, because then we only do that work once. But if there's some reason one would proceed and one wouldn't, then probably we could talk about amending it.
Mark, bit of historical background, it predates me, but the last time the city amended tree diameters, there was a very large public engagement. You remember that, right, Mark? Other Mark?
It was.
So I think that
I
would,
don't think it was acrimonious or.
I
don't think.
can see that as the argument for separating them.
Yeah, we could talk about it. What I'm referring to is we're doing comp plan, climate element, commerce grants, critical areas ordinance, subdivision ordinance, wireless ordinance, everything in the sun, and struggling for agenda times as is. So we just need to factor it in and be sensitive. Doesn't mean we can't do it. And Drew's very capable.
Well, that's kind of aside from the question, should we approve this tonight?
Yes.
And it's tempting to do that, in one sense, because it would keep us from dipping away at it, just passing on other ideas that Drew could think about incorporating.
I think it'd be nice if we pass the same with a few other, little just like cleanups, just so we can get it out of the way, because yeah, it's juggling a couple different tree board projects is a lot, just with the workload. Yeah.
So I move we approve this.
And that would be with the notifications that we discussed,
Through all this formatting and
Yeah, small
technical details, not any changes to the species included.
oh, so the wording change, we suggested both of the bad trees list, and the good trees list.
Yeah, and I wrote down the wording we discussed on here.
All in favor of the motion, would be the second. All in favor? Opposed? Okay. Take that off of our new business and old businesses from now on.
Yay.
All right. Who wants to talk about King County McAleer Creek restoration? KCD McAleer Creek. Oh, boy.
I'll just start with, this started with some basic questions, and like most issues, you try and answer those and you dig in and you find out it's the tip of the iceberg. But it's all good. So I wish I knew, what's occurred over the last 30 years and had it in my brain and what all the programs were. But I don't. And so I'm trying to pick it up from scratch and contact the right people. So tonight I have good news. And I'll start with the bad news. We're just starting. There are a lot of opportunities, a lot of different departments and people, programs, dates, processes, and we don't know them all. But we have two things that are certain. The first thing is that I found and issued a permit. Let me see if I can share. For King Conservation District for McAleer Creek, which is, I think, what started this conversation. And if you can see that on the screen, on North Perkins Way, you'll be familiar with that as far as where 182nd comes down, and then the stream corridor, and then a very steep hillside going up to the west, up to 29th Avenue, and single-family homes that are completely surrounded by trees. That's what I was referring to when this topic came up. This was an active critical areas permit when I started, and the good news is it is issued, and the work will start. Now, it's 3 phases. Zone A starts essentially this year for 2 years. Zone B starts right after that, and then Zone C. So in 6 years, all that work will be performed. All the invasives are removed. Naturals are planted. They have the permits, they have the funding, and KCD does the contracting. So they have everything they need to set the contracting up. This work will build upon a prior project, which is down in the creek corridor from approximately where 182nd joins North Perkins, northward to this pullout that, let's see here if I can put it on the screen, up to about here. That's what I believe Stacy was referring to. And so that was clarified that works was done under a waterworks grant for $45,000, of which 44,800 and something is used. So that's fully expended. The 3-year monitoring period is over, and that project is done, but has future needs. Now with this King Conservation District project that you see on the screen, it'll take it from the riparian corridor all the way up the steep slopes over 6 years. So that's in place. Then in the email chains and clarifying who does what and what a waterworks grant is and all that stuff, there's a third source that we stumbled upon that made things very confusing. What you see on your screen was apparently funded by King Conservation District's Urban Forestry Program grant. But there also appears to be a King Conservation District Urban Riparian Stewardship Program, and which may have a pot of money, and 7 to 10 other projects on 104 and various other spots. So we haven't investigated those yet, but we're sure about the waterworks grant for McAleer Creek in this location, closed. KCD permit issued will happen over 6 years. This location will be taken care of. And then the contacts with those groups have been made. The Waterworks staff, Elizabeth Loudon, essentially put me in touch with the website and the periods for application. They're not open right now, but they will be at some point going into next year. There's $5 million in that pot every 2 years. And so if the question is, are there resources out there that the tree board or some group in the community can apply for? The answer is yes, and it's coming relatively soon over the next year. So I'll stop there. That's a lot of information. I hope that clarifies the first two categories of questions about Waterworks and KCD.
Mark, is this plan inclusive? I initially understood this plan was not inclusive of future upkeep for the plan that was funded by Waterworks. But it looks like this plan does fund that. The KCD plan sort of is
I don't
kind of on top of it though.
know
But
that
it goes all the way up to where that area is.
the Waterworks project is immediately adjacent to the stream. So even that yellow area of this map is further upslope.
Got it.
It's Waterworks thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Waterworks grant was only from sort of the yellow line to the right. To the stream. So
Yeah.
very narrow sliver.
Portions of each side off the steep slope, but about 15 feet. And the the KCD that you have on your screen takes it from where those markings were up the steep slope.
Now, also my understanding is this riparian stewardship program has $144,000 that hasn't been used for Lake Forest Park.
Quite
I
possibly.
think that
Yeah,
that also might be the member jurisdiction grant money, which is, okay, that's separate than these two
just the
grants.
stewardship program. Got it.
Yeah, and so
Whatever.
there may be four. There may be four. We also had a meeting with RIA 8 staff members 2-3 weeks ago. Different pot of money. Everything has the name King or King County associated with it. And so we're trying to parcel them out, figure out where the money is. We know that Waterworks is one category and that grant opportunity is coming into 2025. Good opportunity. KCD, Urban Forestry Program, has a pot of money and a project that for 6 years will be this. Then there's either one or two other programs, one of which is the Urban Riparian Stewardship Program, possibly the Member Jurisdiction and RIA Forum Grant Program that we'll investigate.
Got it. Question, I know in previous conversations, there's been concern that in accomplishing what's on the screen now and the current project, there's potential for damage to the space that was done under the waterworks that's below the yellow, down by the creek. Have you been in conversation at all with them about like how they will minimize or mitigate any damage coming through that space to get up to the zone A work in the yellow zone?
Absolutely. We walked the whole site from 182nd northward. We didn't walk the steep hillside, but we looked at all the access points. They're primarily going to stage up here where this pink dirt pullout is. There's a conduit or some sort of weird crossing in this area. All their work crews are going to be hand tools, light equipment, and they're going to cross there. And then a system of ropes and mountain climbing gear and so forth access this whole area through there. They're not going to be traipsing back and forth over the creek.
Excellent.
But there's a trail that runs parallels the creek on the opposite side of the road that was more or less developed as part of the Waterworks project, just by foot traffic.
Yeah,
And
it could be.
they will be moving up and down that corridor. It would be nice to, in some way, formalize that trail so that people will stay on the trail and out of the plantings that have been planted
Which
as part of the waterwork,
Which side of the creek are you talking about?
opposite side of the road from the, or opposite side of the creek from the road, so it's the foot of that same road. And we staged at the same point. I mean, I was helping with staging for all the plants. The other people planted them. And it just off this map on the upper end is where there's that, bridge across that was technically not designed as a bridge, but it's supported, it covers it.
But there's not really a trail that people use. I mean, I imagine that there was some usage when that
Yes.
project was being done.
It was used so heavily that it was a very followable trail.
For trip.
Yes, and if it were,
Never seen people walk, other than were people who were doing that project.
Yeah.
But I think what Dick's saying is, they need a trail under the
it was
ground.
through the development of that project that trail became formed. But, and it would be nice to formalize it for all the people working on this next project, if they're gonna be in and out of there for 6 years. A lot of plants who were planted in there are gonna get trampled.
You're also, so you're not thinking that as like a public use
No,
feature. in
not
some way.
necessarily. I think this is sort of
Maybe a future.
that's the
It's a big undertaking.
new planting along the riparian zone from the workers who are gonna be working on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
It's just hard to formalize and call it a trail because there's in the code a lot of restrictions
Sure.
on trails and stream buffers. And so I don't think that it would be allowable under the code to have one that close to the stream. It needs to be the
I
other
think
thing
so.
to the buffer.
It sounds like a decision that I'd be happy with those people making, who are doing the work. I trust their judgment in terms of what's accessible and some horizontal, lateral movement like that makes sense. There certainly will be other than
There has to be.
just crossing the trail.
I think we just need to make them aware that there was a project done and we don't want them to try not to trample the project. that was
Yeah.
done.
And you plan stuff.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
tell everyone, as long as like.
Maybe some
KCD
flagging.
Makes that clear to whoever, exactly, if KCD makes that clear to whoever they contract with, I think we're all happy that those
Yeah.
workers, that's not to trample that project.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be a bad idea just to mark it with flags, the beaten in trail,
Yeah,
mark it with flags I would put mark with stakes and flags connected. But you could also just put flags along the trail so that people say,
More of a protection barrier.
yeah.
well, yeah,
Not a trail.
the you could string flags along parallel around on both sides of the trail. Unofficially. With
That helps
people
us
were,
point.
or if they should walk.
It's, as Mark said, they will be qualified. KCD does the contracting. They only hire qualified, experienced crews. So it's not going to be, lowest bidder that normally builds residential or roads, goes in there and tramples everything. These are highly trained, riparian, critical area minded crews.
That's great. So the next question, Mark, is, I guess we have a pot of money for a set of several streams of funding that we can tap for what kinds of things do we want to do?
Yeah.
That's the
And so
question.
that figures into the equation. We will go there. These opportunities are great. We want to take advantage of them. We don't have the staff. By way of example, this was communicated in a category called spare time. Last night, we got the comprehensive plan through the Planning Commission. We're going to start a climate element. I'm not going to lose sight of any of the priority projects that we're doing. The senior position is still vacant, but we want to pursue these. And so I'm glad to know of Waterworks. I'm glad to work with Ellen on this program and get them the permit. Now I am looking for that next thing. I wanted to get through tonight in those first two categories, because I think it was either this morning or yesterday, Corey, our environmental coordinator in the hallway, heard something talked about, and she's well aware of that pot of money. I'm not ready to talk about it. I don't have the bandwidth to talk about it, but it's a way of saying that there is some awareness there. She's been there 10 years. So whatever is there, I think it's important to have that next step.
You mentioned one of the Raya 8s towards the beginning of your listing of those. Was that the Salmon Recovery Council?
Yes, it's District 8 or Water Resource Inventory.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so it's been quiet for some time. So we had a meeting to get reoriented, and the meeting was primarily about what's upcoming as far as refreshing the interlocal agreement, but also reestablishing a presence at meetings, taking advantage of their programs, coordinating. And the conversation was very high level, contracts, agreements, and so forth.
They have several pots of money under RIA 8, but I'm familiar with the Salmon Recovery Council.
Yeah.
They're going to be helpful on McAleer Creek or Lion Creek, just because they focus on Chinook salmon habitat. And then those creeks are not, unfortunately, Chinook. So, and that's always been the case in the past, so I don't know how do you want me to pursue them too far? Unless RIA 8 also under that umbrella has some other, you mentioned an urban forest restoration pot or something, maybe.
They do. Yeah, out in Snoqualmie, I was with RIA 7, and so they have a variety of things: invasive removals, restoration, habitat, salmon. I would think that's the bigger program, but I think I need to learn them all.
But did you say that this project that we're looking at on the screen has funded and is ready to go ahead?
That's correct. Yeah, they needed a critical area permit because of the slopes, and so I've issued that.
And who initiated this project?
I received an email saying who works at the city, and I said I do. I'll meet you out there. So that I don't know.
I feel like with the citizen, wasn't it? I think you had postulated something about the citizens that border that area, someone.
But they did some work prior. I don't have their narrative here. They've done projects there before. This may sound familiar. I don't know if I have it open. So this project you have on your screen is 2.1 acres above the Waterworks project. And the years Waterworks was in 2020. They also did a 2006 city-sponsored ivy removal project. So somewhere in there, it was reapplied for this project, and there were 3 phases, not just this, but to the north and to the east. And so they spent a lot of money in the city's names for the geotech, for the forest plan, and so forth. That was all prepared and done. Then now it's time for implementation. And then staff went away, new staff came in, and it grew silent. And so then I picked it up from there, asked them what permits they need so that we didn't lose the benefit of all those reports and studies. This would close that out. Anything else we're talking about would be a new grant application with Elizabeth, Drew, me, and the new senior planner when we get them.
Well, there is just had his hand up.
So we're at 8:57.
Right.
Seems likely we're not gonna get to tree diameters, but I do want to bring up the topic and just get a quick sense of about that.
Mark, thank you.
So I just want, closing out on 9 o'clock. So I was speaking with our city attorney, and she offered, with the tree diameters, to either attend the October meeting to kind of talk about state law and what you should be looking at and kind of defend it, justify changes, or just sending you that information as an email /PowerPoint. I just wanted to kind of get a sense of the room. Would people prefer for our city attorney to attend October, or to just email the tree board information, general guidance on what state law says, what you should be looking for, how you should support your decisions, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think things will arise that we'll have questions about.
Well, what do we pay her for? She's gonna bill us, I'm sure, for that time. I don't know, it's always nice to have people in person. I can see getting the material in hand and looking at it, and then what a good finder.
Isn't she a salaried employee?
No, she's private, so she's hourly.
Oh, we pay her.
Mark is right.
Okay.
That's different.
it's all the things that probably doesn't make. It is nice to have people there first.
And either way, she would also look over what the tree board's recommending and offer if she has any concerns about that. So what do you think?
Did you share this with her?
I haven't shared the specific recommendations because you haven't started talking about them yet. But I just wanted to at least get, if she was going to attend, get that on her calendar as soon as possible. So is there a preference between her attending versus sending you general guidance by email?
I think you're happy with guidance by email. So,
And then maybe if there is substantial problems or questions that we want to pursue, we can ask them.
she wanted to have more conversation, so they like, no, really. Appreciate the thinking behind the reason for attending them. Part of her preparation.
She's like taking the time to talk to one member, it's like that.
Exactly.
That's billable time.
Or maybe we start out, she emails, she has a slide that she can send you. And if there are a lot of follow-up questions, then maybe we schedule her to attend October. But I'll let Kim know to email either email all of you or possibly send it to Drew or Elizabeth to send it out. Okay, thank you for.
Thank you.
That'd be awesome though.
Well, Larry, I think your question about the previous meeting with several hundred people in attendance, sorry with that, by the way. These are good. This is not like this is not like amending the tree list. This is gonna be. We probably need to, I mean, Drew and I spent a lot of time talking about it. We need to probably suddenly start being very legal. And, make sure we're within the law, no matter how we proceed. I didn't know the wording of laws we had.
It's more to protect in, let's say, lower diameters. And then someone is very unhappy because a tree that wasn't protected has become protected. And now they can't put an extension on their house. If they are exceedingly unhappy, what can they do and how does the city defend their decision? Basically, it's just making sure that we can justify the changes we're making.
Probably an email, that's where it starts. We can see where it goes.
Yep, I will. And then who should I have, Kim? Should I have Kim?
You sent it to Mark and I, so.
Okay, so Mark was already CC'd on my first email.
Okay.
So okay. I'll just respond to that. I'll let Mark handle how it's communicated.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
All right, so move.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you all.
Bye,
See you
bye.
next month.
Thank you, guys.
Good night.
Have a good night.